Hey, we're going to talk about aliens. So specifically, we're going to talk about the Fermi Paradox, the question, why don't we see any aliens? We know that the galaxy is very, very big. We know that the Earth is not particularly unique. We can imagine ourselves in a couple of thousand years becoming an interstellar civilization. So the obvious question is, surely we're not alone, surely we're not the first. Where are they? Why don't we see obvious signs of an interstellar civilization? Why don't we see, I don't know, megastructures or actual ships or radio signals or some other signs that there is some super advanced civilization out there in the galaxy? Why haven't we been visited? Why don't we live in one of the universes, one of our science fiction franchises? So the paradox was named after Enrico Fermi, who was famous, in addition to being a great physicist, for making effective order of magnitude estimations. And the estimation goes a bit like this. There are roughly 100 billion stars in the galaxy. If we assume that maybe only 1 in 10 of those stars has planets, and only 1 in 10 of those planets are sort of the right kind of planet in the right chemistry, only 1 in 10 are about the correct distance from the sun to be not too hot, not too cold. And if we assume then that life is kind of rare and maybe life starts only in 1 out of 100 places where it could exist, and if we even assume that intelligence is rare and intelligence only happens like 1 in every 1,000 planets that have life, even so, if I counted correctly, there should be like about 1,000 intelligent planets with intelligent life, and therefore presumably civilizations. Right? Why don't we see them? So the answer, the thinking goes, well, either they are there and we don't see them because our detection is not good enough, or the technology is not powerful enough to send signals or make projects or things that we would notice, or actually their technology is excellent and they don't leak energy or signals or anything out into space, either deliberately or they choose not to. So one possibility, they're there and we don't see them. Second possibility, one of these steps in this calculation is an overestimate, or the numbers are much rarer for one or more of these steps than what we naively think, and that's what cuts down the number of the expected number of civilizations. That's mainly what I want to talk about. And the other theory, the other possible explanation, is what is known as the great filters. In other words, that yes, there are potentially life happens in the galaxy, perhaps many times, but before long, before it manages to be interstellar civilization, something happens. Either they have an ecological catastrophe or nuclear war or something, and the civilizations die out before they can become what we would recognize as extraterrestrial aliens. So which of these is it? So my answer is all of the above. I'm going to tell you what I think the answer is. I think life is relatively common in the galaxy, but it's almost all microbial. I think even so, there's probably like a handful of intelligent civilizations somewhere in the galaxy, maybe less than 100. And the ones that are there, we're probably not seeing them because we have the wrong expectations. We're looking for the wrong thing. I'd like to talk mainly about the first part, and if we have time, we can talk about the last. So, the Earth is not particularly unusual astronomically. It doesn't have particularly unusual chemistry. It's quite common to have planets. It's quite common to have a planet in that location in a solar system. So we don't think it's surprising to find a planet like the Earth. And indeed, we can detect other planets like that. The Earth has unusual chemistry now because the life has captured the carbon and released the oxygen. But a planet like Earth, before it had life, would not be remarkable. So the Earth is not astronomically unusual. The Earth is unusual in some other ways. It is quite long-lasting. So the universe, to the best of our knowledge, is about 14.5 billion years old. The Earth itself is 4.5 billion years old, so about a third of the time. Just think about it, that is very surprising, especially since our best explanation is that the elements that make up the Earth have had to come from possibly several generations of stars, which would have had to form, collapse in a supernova, release the elements, the heavy elements in the universe. These would have to be like regathered in other nebula that from them our solar system formed, and that all needed to happen before we could have a planet with heavy metals. So it's surprising that all of that managed to happen. That process managed to happen, and the Earth is here. It seems to have happened early. It wouldn't be surprising if the universe was 50 billion years old and the Earth was 5, but 1 in 3 is like surprising, in my opinion. And the other part that's surprising is the Earth is surprisingly long-lived. So we think that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and it had life for most of that time. It had life for 4.5 or 4 or something. And that is also surprising. So we thought early on in our technological civilization that we would find life all over our solar system, but we didn't find any so far. And it's possible that it existed and it's not there anymore. So it's quite plausible that Mars had oceans and thicker atmosphere and potentially life. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we go and find evidence of ancient microbial life, but none of it anymore. And similarly, it would be conceivable, I'm not sure about the chemistry, but it would be conceivable that Venus had a very different chemistry, much lower temperature, possibly an ecosphere, before it had the runaway greenhouse effect. So there is a possibility that the Earth is unusual not in terms of its composition, but in terms of being here, having the conditions of life surprisingly early and surprisingly long, surprising amounts of stability for life to evolve. So it's possible that some of our estimation is off because life kind of occurs but then dies quickly because the planet freezes or boils, or if the average habitable lifetime of a planet is maybe 1 billion years, maybe there's not enough time to achieve advanced civilizations in that time period. The other possible question is estimating how long it takes for life to form. You would intuitively think, the first thing that would come to mind is, life must be a very rare physical process. So for life to form out of inorganic life, that must be the hard part. No, apparently not. We have evidence that Earth had life pretty much immediately that it could have it. So it's about 4.5 billion years old. Initially, of course, it was too hot. As soon as the Earth cooled down enough to have like a solid crust and liquid oceans and so on, we have evidence that life appeared. So it seems that it doesn't take long and it has had life for the remaining time continuously. So it appears that it's not hard. We only have one example, but you would guess that it's not hard for inorganic chemistry to produce organic chemistry and some kind of self-replicating molecule and therefore life. That may indeed be the easy part. But then for the best part of, let's say the Earth had life for 4 billion years, for 3.5 of those, life was basically microbial. It was single-celled organisms. And only in the last 500 million years, life exploded in terms of variety, complexity, the amount of life that was here, and of course intelligence. So let's look at why is this, and of course the implication is that maybe that's the step that the other planets miss. Maybe lots of planets develop early life, microbial life, but they do not evolve into large multicellular organisms and from that intelligence. So if you talk to a biologist, most of them will say, well, the big innovation that happened in evolution is the eukaryotic cell. That's the cell that has a nucleus and certain mini cells inside called mitochondria and other things, which appears to be like maybe more than one more primitive kind of cell combined to create that, who knows. So all of the large multicellular creatures that we know, trees, animals and so on, have eukaryotic cells, so and all the bacteria are prokaryotic cells, the simpler kind. So you would think that eukaryotic cells are the reason, the main thing that allows life to become complex. I think that's not quite I think that describes the phenomenon, that's not the cause. So I think the cause is that in the universe life is common and sex is rare, which means that I think the innovation, the thing that makes a difference in evolution is sexual reproduction, the combining of genes between different creatures. And the fact that the cells that do this are eukaryotic cells, I think this is somewhat beside the point. The reason that evolution, so sexual reproduction we think evolved a little bit after we have evidence of eukaryotic cells. I forget the numbers, about less than 500 million years ago. The reason that sexual reproduction makes such a difference is that if you are a creature like a bacterium that reproduces by just dividing, like from time to time you just divide and you make another clone of yourself, then evolution is tragically slow, because if you have a population of bacteria and one of them has a beneficial mutation and then another one has a beneficial mutation, these two shall never meet. They are like branches of a tree. In order for evolution to make cumulative progress, the creatures must be in the same lineage. So the bacterium should have one mutation and then a descendant of that bacterium, but not a sibling, should have the next mutation, and then a descendant should have the third mutation. They must all come in a line. Obviously, in that configuration, evolution happens quite slowly. If the creature discovers some form of gene mixing, which is sexual reproduction, then it accelerates evolution by several orders of magnitude, because then, if this creature has a beneficial mutation and the next creature has a beneficial mutation, well, if they can mix up their genes, one of the siblings will have both beneficial mutations, and so on and so forth. And it's more like, evolution flows more like a river that has streams, like flows here and there and here and there, and the water just mixes and carries the information downstream in a cumulative way. That I think makes the difference. So I think in the galaxy, life is common but sex is rare. So we're probably going to find billions of planets with microbial life that reproduce by cloning, by simple division, we're unlikely to find large creatures which reproduce sexually. So the other thing that sexual reproduction does is it allows most cells in your body won't reproduce. So your liver and your eyes and your nose and whatever are not going to reproduce directly. They're going to die out. And only the sex cells, or if you were a tree, it would be the pollen and the seeds and so the pollen cells directly, and from then the seed, the zygote. Only a few cells, one for each organism, will reproduce and create the next organism. And that allows a division of labor in the organism, because the cells in, the leaves of the plant or your liver or the soles of your feet, they do not care about reproducing. It's someone else's job. So they don't need to divide except to build up the structure of your body. They do not need to find a mate. They do not need to care for themselves. It opens the way, so sexual reproduction opens the way to both faster evolution and a massive specialization in cells, so that an organism is built as a accumulation of cells that do completely separate tasks, and this gives rise to the very highly complex organisms with trillions of cells that you and I are. So I think the first surprise, the first thing that's unexpected compared to the Fermi calculation, is that most of the life is microbial. The next thing that I believe is rare is intelligence. So not so much intelligence by itself. So we know that the dinosaurs existed by billions of years. As far as we know, they did not become massively intelligent, or at least we don't find evidence of a creature that was particularly dominant in its ecological niche, and it was because of intelligence. It was like because of size or speed or something, but we don't know of some hyper-intelligent, some hyper-intelligent creature from geological time. And even in our world, many creatures are intelligent. They're quite intelligent, but the hyper-intelligence of humans is on a different scale. That, I think, is rare. So I think once you get to multicellular creatures, quite quickly you reach the level of dinosaurs or elephants or birds and so on. And indeed that happened in the planet for the best part of 500 million years. Humans are only about 100,000 years old, so a tiny amount of time. So that suggests it's very rare. The Earth has managed to go on for all that long without developing a hyper-intelligent species. Therefore, it must be hard. I don't think it's hard so much for biological reasons. I think it's hard because to develop hyper-intelligence, you need to be in a very specific ecological niche where hyper-intelligence would indeed make the difference, and you'd get enough ecological pressure to develop it. So let me explain. Elephants are plenty intelligent, but they're so busy pushing the planet away from their bodies that they've evolved the capability to manipulate things with their noses. Good luck making any technological impact in your civilization if your body is like that. Similarly, if you're an underwater creature, there's a lot you can do with tool use and so on, but good luck smelting metals or harnessing electricity. The other thing so you basically you have to have the right appendages and the right kind of body and the right ecosystem for intelligence in the sense of tool use to make a massive difference and therefore to be ecologically selected. The other thing that has to be got right is that you have to be a pretty dominant creature, but not dominant enough for hyperintelligence to take hold. Because I mean, dolphins are already very intelligent. If they were hyper intelligent, what more could they do? They're already apex predators. Nothing can touch them. Sharks run away. They can just catch any fish, and there's no reason to try harder. They live extremely easy lives as far as we can tell. They can use their intelligence for purely social reasons. There's no reason for them to be selecting intelligence for technology because they're too well adapted already. The other part is that if you're a mouse and you develop intelligence and the little mouse comes with this pointy stick that's about that big, and the cat is still going to eat it. It's a mouse, come on. It's not going to make any difference. So humans are in that very narrow niche where we're very strong, but not completely dominant, and hyperintelligence makes us dominant. It is said that humans are a very weak creature because we don't have large fangs and sharp claws and very high speed and so on. But that's nonsense. So people complain that humans are not that powerful because they have in mind lions and bears, and sure enough, one human cannot easily fight a lion or a bear. But the average animal on Earth is something like a rabbit or a lizard, and just by being a huge ape, humans are already massively more powerful than the vast majority of creatures on Earth. We can easily dominate most grazing animals. I mean, cattle with difficulty, but all of the small animals, the smaller prey. So it's not. And gorillas are not particularly, threatened by wildlife. Chimpanzees, I think, are maybe like the smaller size that, they're physically a little bit weak, but with I can imagine hyper-intelligent chimpanzees, if we were not around, becoming the owners of Earth. But if they were much smaller, not really, because they wouldn't be able to overcome the physical disadvantage. So, in order for hyperintelligence to be selected, you have to be in this very rare niche where you have the right physical body, the right appendages to use tools and stuff, and the right amount of power to be almost at the top of the. You have to be almost an apex predator, but not quite. The other thing that people mention is that humans developed intelligence because we have hands and they're necessary for tool use. No, these appendages, which those of you who have reproduced will have noticed, that the main use of these appendages is that they allow you to carry your offspring with you, and that allows humans to produce offspring which are very immature. Essentially, they're unable to keep up with the group in any way for at least a year, maybe a year and a half. So in practice, humans have a gestation period of over 2 years, if you take until they become somewhat self-sufficient. And that allows the brain of humans to be almost completely software. The brain of a cow cannot do that because the calf has to be on its feet pretty much immediately after being born. Okay, it cannot run, but it can stand and see things, and it's relatively well formed. So it's more firmware than learning, than software. The kittens are born immature, but they become mature in a couple of weeks or whatever it is. They're very quick to form their brains. So for hyperintelligence to work with humans, we had to be land-dwelling with free appendages to carry our children and use tools, and we had to be very, very strong but not completely dominant. I think these are therefore between them. I think the probably gene combining or sexual reproduction is the rare, the thing that makes multicellular life and complex organisms rare in general. Then the other barrier is intelligence, I think, is rare. And then we're going to talk a little bit about where that leaves us.